Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm a Ukrainian Canadian. Today is July 24th, 2023, and let's get to the news happening in Ukraine, shall we? So, quick map updates, and then I'll get a little bit into the news. So, the Ukrainian forces right now are advancing into Andriivka and a little bit north of Klishivka. As you can see here, those two areas are indicating Ukrainian troop movements. So, as much as I would like these advancements to be very quick, we have to remember that the Russians have, and it's a gross estimate, about 50,000 soldiers defending the grand area of Bakhmut. So that includes the south of the city and the north of the city in Soledar. And as I mentioned here, Klishivka and Andriivka. So the Russians have a very large amount of forces defending Bakhmut, which makes the job very difficult considering that the Russians are also well entrenched using the previous Ukrainian trenches as their defenses. So it makes the job extremely difficult for the Ukrainian forces to advance at a very quick pace, especially considering that they don't have any jet fighters, they don't have air superiority, and also they don't have as many artillery pieces as the Russians. So despite all that, the Ukrainians are still advancing, they still continue pushing as hard as it is, they are doing it. So I'm expecting probably within, the end of the summer or beginning of September, should start seeing the Ukrainians liberating Klishivka, Andriivka, and starting slowly surrounding Bakhmut. I don't think the Ukrainians will be that fast to take Bakhmut by September, but we should start seeing some very positive results of these small offensives that the Ukrainians are doing in the next few months. So I'll keep you guys updated as to that. And the other big update is that the Russians themselves have started a small offensive in the north of Ukraine. So that is Luhansk and Kharkiv Oblast. So as I mentioned in my previous video last week, the Russians have pretty much pushed about 100,000 soldiers, Russian soldiers, in the north. So that is obviously to distract the Ukrainian forces that are currently fighting in the south and southeast of Ukraine. And so, as I've reported last week, I don't really think the Russians can do a lot of damage in terms of pushing really far in. But I think that this is an area of concern. And for sure, the Ukrainian forces never should underestimate the Russians. At the end of the day, despite the fact that they have been pretty much reduced to a much smaller force, a much less capable force, Russia still has a lot of soldiers. Russia still has a lot of tanks. Russia still has millions of shells and ammunition and various types of missiles altogether. So, of course, you can't discount that. Once you know that Russia can still do a lot of damage throughout the front line. And here you can see that they've opened this front just south of Svatove. And I think that an area of interest that they're trying to push into is this kind of area leads into Izium and also Liman in the south. So perhaps they're trying to break through here to have somewhat of an opening and push all the way up to Izium, which I think is not going to be possible considering that the Ukrainians are well prepared to defend this area. So I don't think that the Russians are going to have massive breakthroughs here. I think it's going to be a similar situation like with Svatove and Kremina, where there's a lot of back and forth. The Ukrainians had the initiative last year around Svatov and Kremina, but they kind of fell short in capturing those two cities, again, because the Russians had thousands of soldiers stationed in both of these cities. So now it's the opposite. The Russians are trying to do the same thing, and the Ukrainians are also defending with a lot of troops. So I think it's just going to be small, low territorial gains, but nothing meaningful enough for us to start panicking, saying, holy crap, the Russians are moving into Izium. I don't think that's going to happen. Either way, I'll keep you guys updated. So another thing that I wanted to discuss is the fact that you can see that, of course, the Russians have a large grouping of forces. And that begs the question, because we've seen videos the last few months of them being poorly equipped, not getting the right equipment, as to how are they still capable of mounting such a large, grouping, so many brigades with Russian soldiers that are mobilized. And that answer can be partially, or I should say, that can be partially answered by the fact that China, who clearly is not a neutral player here, despite the fact that they're trying to present themselves as a, this neutral country that is interested in bringing peace to the region, but at the same time, they still are selling lethal or sometimes non-lethal weaponry and parts to Russia for the war effort. So you can see in this article by the Political, I just copied a small little paragraph from the article, but Russia has imported more than $100 million worth of drones from China so far this year. So starting 2023, 30 times more than Ukraine. So obviously, Russia stepped up the amount of drones they're flying. So that mainly is the DJI Mavic Pros, most likely, among many different variations of drones that China is selling right now. But the most popular one, kind of commercial drone, is the DJI Mavic. And so obviously Russians need that, and Ukraine needs that to be able to fly these drones, to be able to visualize the terrain from above. And so that also plays a huge reason as to why Russia can still keep up fighting in this war. And additionally, Chinese exports of ceramics, a component used in body armor, increased by 69% to Russia to more than $225 million, while dropping by a staggering 61% to Ukraine to mere $5 million, basically, of exports to Ukraine. So you can see that China obviously is interested in both weakening Russia and also weakening the West. That's why they're playing this two-phase game where they're somewhat supporting a peace in Ukraine. They're supporting Ukraine's territorial integrity. They propose these peace plans every once in a while. They try to go and showcase that China is the good person here. But at the same time, it's all business, and they want to make money out of this war. They want to weaken the West and Russia, because for them, that's just killing two birds with one stone type of situation. So let's not pretend that China here is some sort of good actor, because they're definitely are interested in continuing or in seeing this war continue on as long as it takes for them. So I think that's one of the main reasons why Russia is still capable of equipping its soldiers, at a bare minimum with, body armor, some helmets, some weapons, some parts for drones, right? They can still get the minimum, even if Russia can't produce it itself. And let's not forget as well that they have North Korea that also has a large stockpile of ammunition, Soviet-era ammunition. Iran also provides the Shahed drones and also other components to Russia. So unfortunately, Russia still has a good support system to continue fighting. So we need to find ways to cut off these avenues that Russia has to procure itself with parts and weapons. Now, today as well, Moscow was hit by a series of drone attacks, and Ukraine surprisingly claims responsibility for these attacks. So you can see that a drone crashed in the Komsomolsky Prospect near the Defense Ministry building, while another hit a business center in Likhacheva Street near one of Moscow's main ring roads. So Ukraine has said that the attack was a special operation, I like that, carried out by Kiev's forces. And so the spokesperson of the Ukrainian military intelligence, Andriy Yusov, told the Kiev Post that the strikes exposed Moscow's weak air defenses. Again, that's not something surprising. We've seen that the Russian air defense system is not good. It's porous, and if you have drones flying from Ukraine through hundreds of kilometers being undetected, that really showcases to you how well defended the Russian borders really are. And what I liked about this situation is the fact that Ukraine feels more and more confident claiming responsibility for attacking Russia. We've seen Zaluzhny last week saying that nobody will stop me from attacking Russia if I need to. And of course, Ukraine is only attacking legitimate targets. Those are decision-making centers, ammunition depots. Ukraine isn't going to go after civilian buildings or whatever. It only will attack, really important targets that are supporting the war in Ukraine. And, you can bet that the Russians in Moscow are probably telling themselves, why aren't the Ukrainians allowing us to murder more of them in peace, right? So if there's a one positive thing out of here is that the fact that it proves yet again that Russia's defenses are terrible. If Ukraine would like or would consider to invade Russia, to create a buffer zone, it can do so because Russia's defenses in Russia are terrible and they have overcommitted themselves in Ukraine. So, as we've seen with the multiple incursions from the Free Russian legions like a month and a half ago, and they literally broke through all the way up to Shebekino in Belgorod and Bryansk regions without any resistance. Imagine what Ukraine can do with a few brigades that are well equipped. That can do a lot of damage to Russia, but unfortunately, still the West tries to push for de-escalatory messaging. They have a philosophy of let's not escalate things. Ukraine, you can just strike Russians in Ukraine, but don't do it in Russia. But I like what I'm seeing here with Ukraine feeling more and more confident in hitting Russian targets in Russia. Last thing is another important factor that we don't really talk often is also the economy of Russia. So a tumbling ruble is stoking inflation in Russia. So the Bank of Russia on Friday has raised its interest rates by 1 percentage point. That is now 8.5%, as policymakers warn that underlying inflation has exceeded 4% in annualized terms. So that means that if it's 8.5% interest, most likely that it's way higher in real life. So it's over 10% for mortgages, car loans, etc., etc. So life for a regular Russian, already that it was difficult prior to this war, has become very, very difficult. And as you can see, not only is Russia the interest rates going up, but also it's losing its workforce. As you can see that over 500,000 minimum have left Russia, either mobilized men or just completely left Russia because they didn't want to be part of this war. But some say that there's an estimate of over 1 million people that have left Russia since the war started. And I think the number probably is even higher now. So any talk of diversification or creating a higher quality of life, that is all out of the window, she adds. So unfortunately, even though life is becoming harder and harder, the economy of Russia starts to go down rapidly. It's still, as it's mentioned in this article, it's a slow grind. And unfortunately, there's still a lot of durability there in Russia, as Russia is still earning around $425 million just from oil every single day. That's huge. And unfortunately, Russia is still capable of selling its oil, gas, and other raw resources to markets like India, China, who are willing to buy them at a discount. And they're not interested in playing, along with the West by, putting on sanctions on Russia. They're not interested in that. They're very interested in taking advantage of the current situation of a weak Russia to strengthen their own economies and their own positions. So also another thing that we shouldn't discount, even if life is getting more and more difficult for the average Russian, don't forget that that's not going to sway their opinion against this war. It's kind of anecdotal, but I think the regular Russian, their tolerance for hardship is much higher than, let's say, someone in the West. And so I think that it will take a lot for regular Russian to actually revolt. And we've seen that it has to be absolutely catastrophic. The army is decimated. The government is unable to keep the security of its borders. Everything is failing for a revolution to happen, like in 1917. So the only kind of hope we have is within the Russian elite rising against Putin, having enough of this, and saying, we don't want this war anymore. And as we've seen, Prigozhin's mutiny failed because he didn't go all the way through. And so now I seriously doubt if the elites are going to be able to do the same thing again, especially with how brutal and how Putin right now is purging everybody left and right. As soon as he hears a criticism or somebody being dissatisfied within his clique or within the Russian elites, he gets rid of them very quickly. And that's why there's been an exceptional increase of deaths in the last few weeks, of people falling out of windows, millionaires and Russian oligarchs being murdered left and right in Moscow, St. Petersburg. There's a lot of news coming out of Russia proving that. So unfortunately, I seriously doubt the elites will do revolt and forget about the typical regular Russian person. That's just not going to happen. So that's the video for today, guys. I appreciate your support for this channel. Let me know what you think about everything I just said today, especially about a Russian revolt and the Russian oligarchs and the elites perhaps revolting against Putin. Do you think that's going to happen one day, or do you think that this war will be over with Ukraine's victory against the Russian army? So that's the video for today. Thank you for your support, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you and take care. Bye.